Dear Little One, an open letter to younger self. Chapter 9. The Weight, the Fire, the Sea. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. The weight of all you left unspoken hangs in the air like smoke after a fire, acrid, inescapable, and waiting to seep into every breath. It gathers, thick and full, pressing into your chest like a fist, tightening slowly around your ribs, each breath more labored than the last, until your lungs ache from the effort to keep going. This weight, there is no mystery to it. It is every time you were told to stay in your place, every moment you chose silence over risk, every insult you endured with clenched fists and bitten tongue. You learned early that survival often meant disappearing, shrinking yourself until you barely cast a shadow. But this weight is also memory. It is the child you were, sitting with fists in your pockets and words you longed to say lodged in your throat. It is the teenager who bit back tears because the world wasn't kind to softness. These moments haven't vanished. They're here. They sit with us now, waiting, not to haunt you, but to be named. There is anger in that weight. And do not mistake it, it is righteous. It is the same anger that carried Nat Turner through the night. A man who saw no choice but to rise against the whip and the chains, who understood that freedom would never be handed to him, that the oppressor's comfort was built on the back of his silence. Turner stands apart because he refused to wait for permission to be free. His was not a passive resistance. It was fire and fury, an unrelenting belief that justice would not come from submission, but from seizing it with both hands, no matter the cost. It is the same defiant spirit that carried Marshal Major Taylor through a world determined to deny him. A spirit Fanon would have recognized as the fight to reclaim one's humanity. Fanon wrote that the oppressed must break the cycle of dehumanization through acts of resistance. And Taylor's defiance on the track was just that. He raced not just to win medals, but to assert his dignity in a world that sought to erase him. His very presence, every victory, was a refusal to disappear, a declaration that he would not bow to a system built to keep him down. Taylor was the fastest man on two wheels, the first African American to win a world championship in any sport. But even as he broke records, he faced relentless discrimination and violence. His success did not come with applause from all corners. It came despite the hatred, despite the barriers. He would walk into arenas filled with fans who both marveled at his speed and seethed at his presence. They cheered his victories, but never forgot the color of his skin. Taylor endured it all, the taunts, the isolation, the threats, because he knew what was at stake. He rode not just for himself, but for those who would come after him. He left behind a legacy not only of victories, but of defiance, of shattering every barrier built to break him. Taylor raced not merely for medals, but to outrun a world that wanted him to crawl. He faced violence on the track and off, endured sabotage and slurs, and yet he never stopped. His legacy is not quiet. It is a battle cry, a furious declaration that no wall of prejudice could ever define his limits. His story is a reminder that greatness is often forged in the crucible of resistance, where every achievement is an uncompromising act of rebellion. Fanon wrote that revolution is both a psychological and physical necessity, a breaking of chains not only in the body, but in the mind. The act of resistance, Fanon argued, is the pathway to reclaiming one's humanity, and each defiant act is an assertion of life against forces that seek to dehumanize. Taylor's victories were more than athletic triumphs. They were acts of liberation, proving that no system, no prejudice, could erase his existence. His story, like Turner's, does not whisper. It roars. It screams. That dignity must be seized, that freedom will never be politely granted. Turner did not ask to be seen, and Taylor did not wait to be welcomed. Their legacies are forged in defiance, in the refusal to kneel, in the daring act of claiming space in a world that sought to erase them. They did not disappear. They became monuments of rebellion, living proof that the unbroken cannot be erased. It is that same fury that moved Rosa Parks to stay in her seat, not because she was tired, but because she was done bowing her head. Parks did not flinch. She did not beg. Her refusal was loud, even in silence, a defiant declaration that she would no longer make herself small for anyone's comfort. She sat, daring the world to move her, daring it to see her as she truly was, unbreakable. That same fire filled Baldwin's pen with urgency and Wright's pages with protest, a relentless demand to be seen, heard, and never erased. Baldwin, haunted by the ghosts of his Harlem childhood, the sound of footsteps in dark hallways, the echo of a mother's prayer, the silence of fathers lost to despair, and the brutal realities of a country that denied his humanity, wrote not to entertain but to unmask. He carried the weight of every eviction notice, every unjust beating, every whispered fear that survival demanded. Those ghosts shaped his prose, turning every sentence into a reckoning. Baldwin did not write from comfort. He wrote from the fire, demanding that the world see what it tried to forget. His rage was measured, simmering beneath layers of lyrical prose, but it was always there, in every sentence that refused to comfort the comfortable, in every truth that laid bare the nation's hypocrisy. Baldwin understood that to confront those ghosts meant confronting the lie of American innocence, a lie built on the suffering of black bodies. His ghosts were the children left behind, the men broken by the weight of their invisibility, the women silenced by despair. They walked with him, whispering stories that demanded justice, demanding to be seen, even when the world turned away. Baldwin's file contained 1,884 pages, an unprecedented number of documents compiled by the FBI on any writer. The fear wasn't rooted in Baldwin's actions, but in his words. He had no army, no weapons, only the force of truth, yet that truth threatened the very foundation of America's self-perception. A nation can arm itself against revolutionaries, but how does it defend against a man who exposes its soul? The paradox is clear. With all its weapons and resources, the establishment feared a single black writer more than any uprising, because Baldwin's vulnerability was his greatest strength. His voice pierced through walls that bullets never could. What frightened them was not Baldwin's body, but his mind, a mind that could not be shackled or silenced, a mind that could reach into the quiet corners of people's hearts and set them aflame. His essay, The Fire Next Time, warned of an inevitable reckoning if America refused to confront its racism. His novel, Giovanni's Room, challenged notions of identity and belonging, unsettling readers who clung to rigid definitions of love and humanity. Baldwin's words did not comfort. They disturbed, provoked, demanded accountability. His mind was a flame that refused to be extinguished, illuminating the truths that those in power feared the most. He wrote of a country haunted by its own sins, the ghosts of slavery, of stolen lands, of bloodied hands, and a nation terrified of its own reflection. Baldwin forced America to look, to see the scars it tried to hide beneath myths of freedom and righteousness. His words dragged these sins out of the shadows, revealing them in their raw, unvarnished truth. He showed that the past was not dead, but living, shaping every breath, every law, every silence. His writing was an exorcism, and what terrified those in power was the knowledge that once seen, these ghosts could not be unseen. To those in power, Baldwin was dangerous because he made the invisible visible, the unspeakable undeniable. Fanon would have understood this fear. He wrote that the colonizers' greatest terror is a mind awakened to its own worth, a soul no longer bound by the chains of imposed inferiority. Baldwin's words exposed those hidden truths, the rot beneath the surface of polite society. His writing threatened the stability of illusions, and that made him more dangerous than any army. His vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was a weapon. He wielded it to shatter illusions, to peel back the polite facades of civility and reveal the rot beneath. Baldwin's words unmoored the myths that America clung to, and that made him unstoppable. How do you imprison a ghost, an idea, a truth? That was the fear, that Baldwin, with nothing but his pen, could tear down empires built on lies. One can't help but wonder, what made Baldwin such a person of interest for the intelligence agency? Why would a nation armed to the teeth be terrified of a single vulnerable black writer? Baldwin's power lay not in violence, but in his relentless truth-telling. He was a novelist, short story writer, playwright, and prolific social critic. But he was also a witness, a mirror cracked with fury, reflecting a country that refused to see its own wounds. Baldwin was the fracture in America's polished surface, each word a splinter of truth that pierced the illusions of innocence. His vulnerability was precisely what made him dangerous. He exposed the rot beneath the nation's polished veneer, stripping away the myth of innocence. The establishment feared Baldwin because his words laid bare their greatest lie, that oppression could be justified, that silence would keep the oppressed docile. He showed that vulnerability itself, when paired with truth, is a revolutionary force capable of unmasking the most fortified illusions. He saw the ghosts of his people and gave them voices that would not be silenced, truths that would not be softened for fragile ears. To those in power, his pen was more dangerous than any weapon because it struck at the very heart of the lies they lived by. The FBI could document his movements, track his words, but they could not contain the fire in them. Baldwin wrote to reveal the ghosts America refused to see, the ghosts of slavery, of lynching, of systemic oppression, and he made sure those ghosts were never buried again. In works like The Fire Next Time, he forced America to confront its sins head-on, refusing to allow the nation to turn away from its own reflection. His words demanded accountability, shattering the comfort of ignorance and revealing the brutal legacy that shaped every aspect of American life. It is Fanon's rage against dehumanization, the fury of a man who refused to let his dignity be stolen by colonial lies, who saw no future in submission and no salvation in silence. Fanon believed that true liberation required not only dismantling the physical structures of oppression, but confronting the psychological chains that kept the oppressed bound. He argued that the colonized must reject the identity imposed upon them by their oppressors and reclaim their humanity through revolutionary action. Baldwin shared this belief that liberation was as much an internal struggle as it was an external one. Both men understood that freedom is not granted, it is seized. Liberation is not a gift. It is an act of defiance, an exorcism of imposed silence. Fanon knew that oppression burrows into the mind like a ghost, whispering lies of inferiority and submission. Baldwin knew it too. Their words were more than ideas. They were incantations against those ghosts, spells meant to fracture illusions and ignite freedom in the hearts of the oppressed. It is the fire that burns through every word of Richard Wright, demanding to be heard, refusing to be erased. This anger is not new. It is ancestral. It is the smoldering fury passed down from those who refused to be erased. It is the rage of ancestors who knew that silence was a coffin, and the only way to live was to speak, to rise, to refuse. It is the anger of a child who learned too soon that survival meant shrinking, biting back tears and carrying burdens that were never theirs to hold. It is the rage that comes with understanding the lies the world told you, that their shame, their guilt, their violence were yours to carry, but they never were. And now that rage no longer hides. It rises, unapologetic and unrelenting, ready to claim the space it was always meant to occupy. You learned to bury it, to smile when you wanted to scream, to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You were taught to fear your own voice, because what would happen if you unleashed it? Who would you become if you claimed your space? But that fear was never yours to hold. It was given to you by people who feared the power of a child unbroken. I speak now with the fury you were told to deny. And it is not a fury that destroys. It is a fire that forges. It burns away the lies, the shame, the silence. It says no more. You are not here to carry the weight of others' sins. You are not here to make yourself small. Your rage is not a curse. It is your inheritance, the same fire that lit Turner's rebellion and Baldwin's pen, the defiance that carried Rosa Parks through the storm of silence, and the resilience that Major Taylor peddled through every insult and barrier. It is a legacy of refusal to bow, to break, to be erased. It is the voice of every ancestor who was told to bow their head and did not. It is the voice of every child who was told to be quiet and refused. This rage is the drumbeat that moves history forward. It is the rhythm of liberation, the pulse of revolution. It carries with it the weight of every injustice, but also the promise of freedom. It is not a fire that consumes. It is a fire that clears the path, burning away what no longer serves, lighting the way for those who follow. The ghosts you buried were never silent. They were waiting for you to listen, to understand that the anger you feel is not a burden. It is a call to action. It is the fuel that will keep you moving forward when the world says you should stand still. And so I say to you now, do not be afraid of your own fire, the relentless drive to speak the truths that others fear. It is the flame of defiance, the light that reveals what the world prefers to keep hidden. And do not be afraid of the ghosts who walk with you. They are the memories of every injustice, every unspoken word, every silenced voice. They do not haunt to harm. They rise to guide, to insist that the story is not over, and the silence cannot hold. They are not here to drag you back into the dark. They are here to walk beside you, to remind you that you have always been worthy of love, of joy, of freedom. You buried them because you thought you had to be strong. But strength is not silence. Strength is speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes. Strength is standing tall, even when the weight feels unbearable. Strength is knowing that you were never meant to carry it alone. The ghost of the child who felt unworthy. She whispers, "You are enough." The ghost of the teenager who feared rejection. He murmurs, "You are loved." The ghost of every moment you doubted yourself. They all chorus, "You are whole." These ghosts are not your enemies. They are your guides. Their voices merge with mine as I tell you this. We are no longer bound by silence. We are free to speak, to feel, to heal. The ghosts you buried speak through me, and they speak of liberation. They speak of reclaiming our story, not as one of sorrow, but of resilience, of courage, of boundless love for the person you have become. And when the fire within softens to an ember, let it warm you, like a hearth that gathers you home after the storm, a quiet reminder that peace follows every tempest, and the light you carry will never truly fade. Let it remind you that anger too has a season, but love remains. Love for who you were, for who you are, for who you are becoming. A love that embraces your flaws and your light, your moments of doubt and your moments of courage. It is the kind of love that takes root in the quiet corners of your being, softening the edges of old wounds and planting seeds of healing. This love is a quiet revolution, a declaration that you deserve peace, joy, and the freedom to grow into all you are meant to be. It is love that steadies the hand when the voice trembles. It is love that fills the space the ghosts once haunted. With each step, you carry their stories, their whispers etched into your bones. You move toward a future not bound by the weight of what was, but alive with what could be. A future built on resilience, shaped by love, and waiting to be claimed. But now, they no longer weigh you down. They lift you, like unseen hands steadying you when you falter, like a chorus of voices reminding you that you've never walked alone. Their voices harmonize with yours, not as burdens, but as blessings. Blessings that show up in the laughter you've reclaimed, in the quiet confidence that comes when you walk into a room, in the warmth of conversations where you no longer hold back. They are the gentle push that keeps you moving forward, like a whisper of wind on your back when the path feels steep. They are the knowing nod in moments of doubt, a flicker of light when shadows stretch long, and the peace that follows when you finally let yourself be seen is as quiet and steady as the tide, washing away what you thought you had to hide, but it also crashes against you like a wave, startling, undeniable, demanding that you let go of what no longer serves you. You are not alone. You never were. And perhaps now you must ask yourself, what would remain if you stripped it all away? The noise, the fear, the borrowed dreams handed to you by those who never dared to dream for themselves. Whose ambitions have you carried, mistaking them for your own? And if those borrowed dreams fell away, would you finally see what was always yours to begin with? What faces would meet yours in the quiet? Would they be familiar? Echoes of your past? The ones you've tried to forget? Or would they be strangers, waiting patiently for you to recognize their unwavering gaze? What truths would rise from the ruin if you stopped running? Would you recognize yourself? Or has that image faded beneath the weight of surviving? You are here now. What will you claim? Who told you to wait for permission? What would it take to believe that nothing was ever lost, only waiting for you to see? What if you stood still long enough to hear the sound of your own breath? Would it comfort you, or would it remind you of all you've avoided? Would the silence be your redemption or your reckoning? A distant echo of footsteps on an empty street, each one a reminder of what you've left behind. And if it is reckoning, would you have the courage to look it in the eye? There is no peace in pretending. There is no salvation in shadows. There is only the relentless pull of truth like a river's current, silent, inevitable, carrying you toward what you've always known but feared to see, waiting to be met with open eyes. What would shift if you accepted that your story does not end in grief, but in the audacity to hope? Where would you go if you weren't bound to the ghosts of what could have been? Before you let the world tell you who you are, pause. Who would you become if you believed, even for a moment, that you were already free?